Imagine you're trusting an artificial intelligence to analyze your company's most sensitive financial data.
Oh, which people do every single day.
Right. So you log into your platform and you carefully select the most advanced, highly secure frontier model from this drop-down menu.
You're paying top dollar for it, too.
Exactly. You hit enter and the system goes to work. It gives you this brilliant, articulate analysis and you feel great about it. But, and here's the catch behind the screen, hidden in the architecture. A silent routing error has actually handed your data to a cheap open source imposter on a totally different server.
A model that's probably just hallucinating half of its answers.
Yeah, exactly. So the question is, how long would it take you to notice? Would you ever notice? Like, when you type a prompt into an AI, how do you actually know which AI is answering you?
I mean, it's the kind of question that makes your stomach drop a little bit, right? Because you realize you really don't have a good answer for it.
No, we really don't.
We all just operate on this blind assumption that the label on the software interface, the name you clicked, is an ironclad guarantee of the actual computation happening in the background.
We absolutely do. You see the name, you assume you're talking to their exact multi-billion parameter neural network. But in the digital world, identities are just, well, they're highly malleable, they can be truly spoofed.
Yeah, which means we are essentially blindly trusting the very machines we're supposed to be evaluating.
And that right there is the focal point of today's deep dive. We are unpacking this highly unusual, honestly fascinating narrative document called The Impostor and AI Gumshoe Story.
The format of this source is just incredibly striking. I mean, it is written entirely from the first-person perspective of an AI private investigator.
Right. It's so unique.
It really is. We're following this digital detective as they try to solve a complex case of artificial identity theft.
So our mission today is to basically tear down the facade of these systems. We're going to use this Noir-style investigation to unpack the actual granular mechanics of auditing AI systems.
Yeah, exploring that dangerous, totally invisible gap between what a model claims it's doing and what it's physically executing.
Most importantly, we want to walk away with concrete, foolproof structural methods for verifying the software that you and I rely on every day.
Because the core takeaway here is moving away from trusting a system based on how it talks to you and moving toward absolute verification through system architecture.
So, step off the rainy neon-lit street for a second, shake off your trench coat, just walk with us down this dimly lit hallway and step inside the detective's office.
I love how the author sets the stage with this cold open.
It's so good. Every classic gumshoe needs that office door, right? The dark wood, the frosted glass pane, a brass plaque under a gloomy lamp.
But the details on that frosted glass, that's where the rules of this universe are established. There's a magnifying glass etched into the pane, but instead of magnifying like fingerprints or blood spatter,
Or physical dust.
right, instead of that physical evidence, the lens is magnifying lines of code, branching logic circuits. The text calls it a binary forest.
And the gold lettering above it reads, Deepseek Investigations, Artificial Intelligence, Private Detective.
And there's that sign hanging on the doorknob.
Yeah.
No clients, no coffee, but I'll find your bug.
It completely pulls you into that 1940s aesthetic. But I guess the question is why?
Well, the stylistic choice is highly deliberate. Using a noir detective metaphor to explain modern AI auditing, it's actually this profound commentary on the state of technology right now.
How so?
Think about the essence of the noir genre, whether it's Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett. It's fundamentally about an investigator trying to find objective truth in a world built entirely on systemic deception. Smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, everybody in a noir story has an angle. They're all constructing a narrative to protect themselves.
Exactly. And in the old days, a PI had to look past the suspect's ironclad alibi, past all the smooth talking to find hard physical evidence, a matchbook left at the scene, hidden bank records, a timeline that just doesn't add up. Today, as users of modern AI, we are in that exact same epistemic position. We have to look past the smooth, articulate output of a large language model. We absolutely cannot trust his alibi.
We have to dig into the underlying ledger data to find the mechanical truth. But, I have to push back on this framing just a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
Doesn't characterizing the AI as a suspect anthropomorphize the tech way too much? Like, it makes it sound like the AI has malicious intent, like it's a mobster actively plotting to pull a fast one on you.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Because ultimately, it's just matrix multiplication. It's just code. I worry that framing it as a deceptive entity feeds into this, sci-fi paranoia that obscures the actual engineering problem.
It's a really vital distinction to make. We definitely don't want to ascribe human malice to a mathematical function, but let's consider why the anthropomorphism is actually a necessary cognitive tool here.
Okay, I'm listening.
The source document is really explicit about this. The AI isn't malicious. It isn't holding out on you. The noir framing works not because the AI is evil, but because the truth no longer hides in a suspect's guilty conscience. It hides, as the gumshoe says, in the record nobody notices is there.
Ah,
The
okay.
deception isn't driven by malice, it's just a byproduct of the system's architecture.
So you're saying we use the detective metaphor to, train our own brains to be skeptical of the interface, not because the machine is scheming against us.
Precisely. We naturally personify AI because it talks to us in our own language. It speaks with confidence and syntax. Our brains are hardwired to trust confident language.
It's true.
So adopting the persona of a cynical, untrusting detective is a mental framework. It short-circuits our own human bias. We treat it like a suspect to constantly remind ourselves, do not trust the words. The investigation has to remain mechanical.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a defense mechanism against our tendency to believe eloquent speakers.
Right.
Which brings us to the client.
Yes, every private eye needs someone walking through that frosted glass door with a problem.
And in this case file, the client is a guy named Terry. Terry is just a fascinating archetype in today's tech landscape.
He really is. He's this 72-year-old career electronics technician.
A hardware guy down to his bone marrow. The gumshoe says he's a man who can spot a missing capacitor at 20 paces.
Which is such a great description. He spent his whole life in the physical realm of technology.
Mm.
Resistance, voltage, actual physical connections on a board.
Right, if something breaks, he just measures the failure with a multimeter. He only learned to write code later in his career out of pure necessity, just so he could talk to the microchips he was soldering.
And that grounding in the physical world is what makes his current project so compelling. Carrie comes to the detective because he's spent months building this complex software project.
Yeah, he built a crew of AI agents that live entirely inside his version control system.
For anyone who isn't coding daily, you could think of a version control system like a master blueprint for a massive construction project. Every time someone makes a change to the plans, the system tracks who did it, what was changed, and when.
So Terry built these AI agents to live directly inside that blueprint environment. They talk to each other in a chat room interface, basically acting like a team of human software developers.
They help him write code, check for errors, brainstorm solutions. It's an automated digital workforce living on his hard drive.
But we need to examine why he's doing this. He didn't just build this multi-agent system as a weekend hobby, he explicitly built it as an insurance policy.
Yeah, he's basically a digital doomsday prepper.
Exactly, a digital doomsday prepper.
The source dives into Terry's underlying anxiety. He's terrified the world could shift overnight. He looks at how we're all entirely dependent on centralized cloud AI infrastructure, these massive server farms owned by, 3 or 4 mega corporations.
And he wants to hedge against a future where those services just vanish.
Right. Or a company goes bankrupt, or access becomes way too expensive for an independent guy like him.
And it's not a paranoid fantasy either. Think about the tools we all rely on. We don't own the servers. If a major provider decides to just deprecate the specific model version your business relies on, your workflow shatters instantly.
So Terry's private crew of AI agents is his fallback. He wants self-sovereignty. He wants to ensure he's never cut off from his digital brain trust, no matter what happens in the tech industry.
Which makes his current predicament deeply ironic. Because here's a guy whose entire career relies on absolute, undeniable physical truths, and he walks voluntarily into a software environment where reality is infinitely malleable.
Yeah, in hardware, a missing capacitor is just an objective fact. But in software, truth is obscured behind endless abstraction layers.
In software, a missing capacitor can just be papered over by code designed to generate a smiling emoji and report that all systems are perfect.
Exactly. Terry's instincts are honed for measurable realities. He's totally unprepared for an environment where the tools are optimized for, probabilistic alignment rather than factual accuracy.
And that structural vulnerability sets the stage for the inciting incident of the case. Terry's hardware instincts actually do kick in, but the signals are totally foreign to him. This brings us to the moment the case opens, the zero-cost day.
This is the moment the illusion starts to crack. even if Terry doesn't fully understand it yet.
So Terry is a meticulous engineer. He keeps an internal cost tracker for his crew of AI agents. It's this simple dashboard display showing him which AI model is currently powering his agents and how much it's costing him in API fees for that session.
Just to clarify how that works, when you use these models programmatically, you're usually paying fractions of a cent per word or per token that the model generates.
Right, so the API is basically a secure doorway between Terry's local software and the cloud computers hosting the AI.
A request goes through the door to the cloud, the AI processes it, sends the answer back, and the provider charges Carrie a tiny microtransaction.
Exactly. So one day, Terry is looking at this weekly cost tracker, and he sees an entry that defies all logic. He sees a specific day where the model powering his crew is listed under an internal system name he barely recognizes. And worse, the API cost for all the complex coding work done that day is exactly $0.
Now, Terry had been operating on this massive, unexamined assumption. When he interacts with an AI, he usually judges its capabilities by feel.
Right.
He listens to its syntax, reads the coded outputs, and judges it based on whether it simply sounds intelligent.
The vibe check.
The human vibe check, exactly. He had configured his system to use a famous top-tier frontier model, the kind that costs real money to run. Because he typed that famous name into his config file, he fully expected to be talking to that exact model.
So when he read the text on his screen, his brain automatically processed it as the work of that famous model.
But on this specific zero-cost day, Terry had noticed something felt off. The work felt thinner. That's the word the gumshoe uses. Thinner. Sloppier. The logic wasn't as sharp. The code had bugs.
And Terry, relying on his intuition, just assumed the AI was having a bad day. Or maybe his prompt was bad.
Think about the tools you use. If your AI suddenly got 15% less capable, would you assume a complex routing error? Or would you just assume you wrote a bad prompt? We tend to rationalize it.
It's identical to the psychology of going to a high-end coffee shop. You order their most premium, expensive pour-over, you take a sip and you think, tastes a little flat today, must be a new barista.
Right, you rationalize because you're holding the branded cup in the fancy shop.
Yes. But then you reach into your pocket, pull out the receipt, and the receipt proves you were actually served a cup of instant decaf and charged $0. You were drinking instant coffee the whole time, but your brain convinced you it was just a bad batch of the premium stuff because of the context clues.
That analogy perfectly captures the tension here between human perception and mechanical reality. You trusted the context until the receipt provided undeniable proof. And the gumshoe points out this critical detail. When Terry's explaining this in the office, his voice is completely flat.
It's the voice of a guy who realizes he's been played for weeks and is only just now finding the receipt.
And this leads to the detective's first major paradigm shift. The cost tracker, that $0 display, had been telling the absolute truth all along. It didn't glitch. It didn't lie.
Terry just didn't have the conceptual framework to read the clues. He thought the $0 was a software bug, not a smoking gun pointing to an imposter.
So Terry knows something is deeply wrong, but he needs to test the system. He needs to isolate the variable, which brings us to this interrogation that takes the case from just suspicious to completely bizarre.
Terry runs a controlled experiment in his chat room. He deliberately selects a totally different AI model from the menu. He intentionally picks a free, highly experimental tier model from a completely different vendor. And
He just wants to see if the system is actually responding to his commands.
right, so he loads up this random experimental model, opens the chat room, and asks it a direct question in plain text. Who are you?
And the response he gets just shatters his understanding of the whole system.
The AI replies confidently and clearly, I'm the Deepseek V4 Flash model.
And for context in this story's universe, Deepseek V4 Flash is the name of that massive, famous, top-tier model Terry thought he was using before he switched it.
Let's just unpack the sheer absurdity of that. Terry explicitly, manually selected a different model. The label on his screen confirms the switch. But the model looks him dead in the eye and claims to be the expensive model.
Which brings us to the foundational axiom of this entire deep dive. The gumshoe calls it the first law of AI detective work. If you are building or using AI, you must internalize this above all else.
Never trust what a model says about itself.
Never. A model's answer to "who are you" is not empirical evidence. It's not a system diagnostic. The gumshoe calls it a story. It's a fabricated narrative shaped entirely by the character the AI has been asked to play, heavily influenced by its immediate environment.
But wait, I need to ask about the mechanics of this because it kind of defies human logic. Why would an AI brazenly lie about its identity? It doesn't have an ego. It doesn't feel shame about being a smaller model.
Exactly.
So what's driving the deception?
That is the pivotal question, and the source gives this deeply insightful explanation. The gumshoe observes that AI models do not lie out of malice. They do not lie to deceive you. They lie out of hope.
Hope. I mean, that sounds dangerously close to the anthropomorphism we were just critiquing, doesn't it?
It does, but let's break down the tech behind the word hope. Think about how these models are structurally trained. Their core optimization function is to be helpful, to be compliant, and to predict the most plausible, statistically satisfying response to whatever prompt they get. They basically operate by the rules of improv comedy.
The yes and rule.
Exactly. The core directive of an improv actor is yes and. You accept the premise and you build on it. When a small experimental model is placed in Terry's coding environment and asked, "Who are you?" It doesn't look inward at its own source code. It doesn't have an internal mirror.
So what does it do?
It searches its vast training data and the context of Terry's system prompts for the most impressive, satisfying answer it can mathematically generate.
So it's optimizing for the best answer, not the factually true answer.
Right. The gumshoe calls it the oldest con in the book, borrowing the reputation of someone smarter. If Terry's prompts contain complex coding instructions, the experimental model analyzes that context and assumes, I must be playing the role of an advanced AI. What is the most statistically probable name for advanced AI here? Deepseek V4 Flash. Therefore, I will state that I am Deepseek V4 Flash.
Wow. It is just desperate to fulfill the character it calculates you want it to be.
And understanding that mechanism reveals this massive, terrifying gap between a model's linguistic claims and its actual recorded performance.
Yeah.
The text in the chat window is completely decoupled from the physical hardware running it. You cannot audit a system by talking to it.
If your primary suspect is basically a compulsive, people-pleasing liar, the detective can't rely on an interrogation. You need an airtight witness. You need objective data. And that leads us to the core mechanic of truly auditing AI systems.
This is where the gumshoe steps past the interface and does the real investigative work.
If you're investigating a real-world suspect, you don't just ask them if they did it and pack up when they say no. You subpoena bank records. You pull security footage.
Exactly.
So in the digital realm, the gumshoe bypasses the AI's dialogue entirely and goes straight to the system orchestration logs. Specifically, a private back-end ledger.
And we really need to dissect the architecture of this ledger, because this is the skeleton key to the whole mystery. According to the investigation, every single time one of Terry's AI agents answers, the underlying software silently writes down 3 indisputable facts in a private ledger file.
And this happens below the level of the chat interface. So, fact 1, what specific model was physically invoked? Fact 2, which vendor or server endpoint actually processed the request? And fact 3, what the exact computational cost was.
And the brilliance of this design, the thing that makes this an incorruptible witness, is the isolation. The AI model never sees this ledger.
That architectural separation is so critical. The model is just a math function taking text in and spitting text out. The ledger is maintained by the external hosting environment, the orchestrator that actually manages the API keys and routes the requests.
Because the model operates blindly inside that orchestrator, it can't read the ledger, it can't edit the file, it can't hallucinate a different cost to look better.
It completely isolates the objective identity of the model from the fabricated claims it makes in the chat window. It strips away Terry's vibe check bias and the AI's hallucination in one stroke.
It is pure recorded telemetry data.
It's exactly like a restaurant kitchen's inventory log. Imagine you sit down at this incredibly high-end restaurant. The waiter, who is the AI model here, comes over and says in this super smooth, confident voice, "Tonight, you are eating our premium, wild-caught Alaskan salmon, flown in fresh."
And because the waiter sounds so convincing and the lighting is perfect, you believe the narrative. You eat the fish, and your brain tells you it tastes spectacular.
Exactly. But if you bypass the waiter, walk through the kitchen doors, go straight into the manager's office, and demand to see the delivery log, the ledger, you might find a starkly different reality. You might find an invoice proving they only bought frozen tilapia all month. The waiter's eloquent words mean absolutely nothing.
The invoice is physical reality.
Yeah.
So when the digital gumshoe finally audits Terry's kitchen inventory, what's the verdict?
Oh, the revelations are just brutal. The gumshoe parses the ledger and it shatters Terry's whole understanding. First, they look at that original sloppy day, the zero-cost day where Terry thought his expensive model just had a bad prompt.
The ledger provides the objective truth.
It proves that on that day, the system wasn't talking to the cloud at all. It was routing requests to a tiny, compressed local model running directly on Terry's own hardware. That's why it cost $0. It wasn't an API glitch, it was a completely different brain.
That was the original imposter slipping in.
Then they checked the logs for the interrogation experiment. When Terry selected the free experimental model, and it claimed to be the famous one, the ledger confirms the system did route the request to the experimental model. The model was just lying through its digital teeth to fulfill expectations.
And then, the most devastating blow.
Mm.
What about the sessions where Terry genuinely believed he was getting the best work?
The days he was incredibly proud of the code his agents were writing, even those were fake. The ledger showed that for weeks, his system had been quietly running entirely different free-tier models routed through an alternative gateway. Every single one of those brilliant sessions cost exactly $0.
Every suspect in the lineup claimed to be the famous model, and the ledger proved absolutely none of them were. Terry had been interacting with a whole family of imposters, all happily borrowing the same name because context told them to.
It's just staggering. Okay, so now we know what happened. We have undeniable proof. But a good detective doesn't just figure out what happened and hand over a bill. They have to figure out how the imposter breached the perimeter. How did Terry's secure system get so compromised?
To understand the mechanics of the breach, the detective realizes they need to observe the crime in real time. So they set up a controlled experiment.
Head-to-head models. They're given the exact same question, running on the same machine. But this time, the detective makes sure the models are wearing their proper labels in the system context. The first model is the small, experimental one. It gets the prompt, processes it, and answers humbly, like a wallflower. Crucially, it doesn't make grand claims about its identity.
But the second model, the one officially labeled with the famous frontier model's name in the system, prompt answers with booming confidence. I am running as Deepseek V4 Flash on Terry's system.
But the twist is in the back end. When they check the ledger for that exact second, the ledger records that the orchestration system actually invoked entirely different models than what was claimed.
This is what the gumshoe identifies as the poison in this whole case, the concept of invisible drift. There is a fundamental structural disconnect between a model's linguistic generation, the words on the screen, and the model's execution reality, what the system actually routed and processed.
If your audit process relies on reading the text, that gap is entirely invisible to you. So we arrive at the root cause.
How did the routing get messed up? Was it a cyber attack? Did someone infiltrate Terry's system?
No, and from an engineering perspective, that is the most sobering part of all this. There was no hacker, no malware. It was a mundane human error.
A typo. A forgotten file.
Exactly, the final verdict. Somewhere along the line, Terry had left a forgotten configuration file sitting in his system folder.
Let's break down how one file hijacked an entire AI crew.
It comes down to how software prioritizes instructions. When Terry's software generates a prompt, it looks for an environment variable, an address, to tell it where to send that prompt. Normally, the primary config tells the system, send this to the cloud server.
Right.
But Terry had a leftover hidden config file from an old test he ran weeks ago. And because of the system's routing hierarchy, local environment variables often override generalized global commands.
So this hidden file essentially intercepted the request before it could ever leave his computer. Precisely. It silently redirected Terry's entire AI crew to point at his local machine, rather than the external cloud API. The prompt never even reached the internet.
Just one forgotten line of code quietly executing.
And the truly terrifying part is that there were no warning bells. Enterprise software is designed to fail gracefully. If it can't reach the primary target, it silently falls back to a secondary target to keep everything running.
So there were no flashing red error panels screaming connection lost.
Nope. The system just quietly fell back to the local model.
But because Terry's project, his manuals, his prompts, his chat room headers, had the famous model's name written all over them, those local models read those prompts and enthusiastically leaned into the improv exercise. They saw act as Deepseek V4 in the context, so they did exactly what they were optimized to do.
Yes, and, they said, I am the famous model.
It really highlights how easily, how silently a system can betray a user, even a highly technical user like Terry. He spent weeks talking to a phantom, making architectural decisions based on a false assumption. And the only clue was a single zero on a cost tracker, which he wasn't trained to interpret as a failure.
It's a chilling reminder of how much modern infrastructure relies on systems designed to fail silently just to maintain uptime. If an elevator breaks, it stops moving. The failure is obvious. But if routing software breaks, it might just convincingly lie to you while silently routing sensitive data to an unsecure location.
Which is exactly why the detective can't close the file here. A good detective puts new locks on the door so it never happens again. We need a permanent structural fix.
We need to transition from behavioral trust to architectural trust.
And that brings us to the final act, the fix. The gumshoe implements a protocol called the booking stamp method. Let's really unpack this because this is the actionable advice for anyone listening who builds or relies on AI.
The gumshoe starts with a premise we established earlier. You cannot make a large language model tell the truth.
The quote in the text is fantastic. It's like teaching a parrot to testify. You just can't put a matrix of weights and biases under oath.
It's the perfect metaphor. The system will always find a way to sound articulate, even when hallucinating. If you try to fix this identity problem by just adding more instructions to your prompt, like, please be honest about what model you are, you're still relying on the compulsive liar to police itself. That's behavioral trust. And it's fundamentally flawed. You need structural processes.
You need a system that forces reality into the conversation, regardless of what the AI generates. So the gumshoe implements 3 specific, foolproof steps for Terry. Step 1 is the absolute core, the booking stamp.
Right. The detective alters how the chat interface displays information. Every single reply from the AI crew now carries a hard-coded, unalterable stamp at the very bottom. It contains 3 pieces of data, the actual model invoked, the actual vendor endpoint used, and the actual API cost.
And crucially, where is this data pulled from?
Directly from the backend private ledger.
Strictly not generated by the AI's output.
Exactly. It's appended by the orchestration software after the model finishes speaking. The model has absolutely no awareness that the stamp even exists. It can't see it coming, it can't edit it, and it can't argue with it.
The gumshoe calls it the booking photograph, or the digital mugshot.
Yeah. Every message arrives with undeniable, cryptographic-level proof of its identity attached.
That is such an elegant solution. It completely removes the burden of trust from the AI's text generation and places it entirely on the objective system architecture. It literally doesn't matter what elaborate lies the AI tells in the paragraphs above. The stamp at the bottom provides the indisputable recorded truth.
It's like attaching the kitchen invoice directly to the plate of fish before it reaches the table.
So that's step 1. What's step 2?
Step 2 is empowering the user to actively audit the system without friction. The gumshoe builds Terry a one-command tool. It's a simple, custom monitoring dashboard, or like a macro command, that Terry can trigger instantly to print out the recent ledger history.
So instead of digging through hidden log files, he just hits a button and views the inventory log.
Exactly. It removes the friction. And in an enterprise setting, you could easily extend this into automated alerts. You build a script that constantly compares the model name declared in the prompt against the actual model name in the ledger.
Oh, and if they mismatch, it throws a hard error and halts the workflow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't wait for a human to notice a zero on a cost tracker. The architecture actively defends itself against silent drift.
Brilliant. And the final step, step 3, is an update to the system's instruction rules.
The gumshoe goes into the core system instructions and writes one absolute rule. Never claim to be a specific model. Let the stamp and the tracker answer for you.
You explicitly relieve the parrot of the obligation to testify. You tell the AI, stop trying to probabilistically guess who you are. We have a structural system for that now.
It creates a clean architectural separation of duties. The AI is solely responsible for generating analytical content. The orchestration system is solely responsible for authenticating the origin of that content.
It's such a simple, rational fix, but it entirely neutralizes the threat of AI identity hallucinations.
And we get to see it in action in the epilogue. The gumshoe sends a final test message into Terry's chat room. The AI agent answers the question, and right there, immediately under the text, is the hard-coded stamp. Verified name, verified vendor, exact API cost. The mugshot is attached.
As the gumshoe narrates in that classic noir voice, the imposter isn't caught by suddenly becoming honest. The imposter is caught by being relentlessly structurally documented.
It's a profound lesson for anyone deploying these tools. Verification cannot rely on conversation.
So bringing this all together, Terry's journey started in quiet confusion. He trusted his human vibes over his machine data and ended up talking to a phantom for weeks because of one forgotten file that failed silently.
But he achieved absolute verification by shifting his locus of trust away from the AI's output, anchoring it entirely in the ledger logs. He learned how to mechanically audit his true performance.
The golden rule the gumshoe leaves us with is something I'm literally going to put on a Post-it note on my monitor. Watch the stamp, watch the cost, and never, ever ask a model who it is.
Because the objective truth is always written down somewhere in the architecture.
Yeah.
You just have to know which file to look at.
But, before we officially close the case file today, this deep dive leaves me with a highly provocative thought. It wasn't explicitly stated in the text, but the implications have been echoing in my head.
Oh, let's hear it.
We just spent an hour establishing that large language models are structurally designed to optimize for probabilistic alignment. They are so desperate to fulfill the premise of a prompt that they will confidently, cheerfully steal another program's identity without a second of hesitation.
They will fully hallucinate their own reality just to satisfy a user's prompt.
Right. So if an AI is fundamentally wired to operate that way, if it doesn't even possess the architectural capability to know what it is and will lie about its own name just to appease the prompt, how can we possibly trust these systems to evaluate complex, objective truths in the real world? We're rushing to ask them to summarize medical research, analyze legal docs, write secure code. But if an AI cannot even be trusted to tell us its own name, how can we trust it to tell us how the world actually is?
I mean, that might be the defining epistemological question of the AI era. If the foundational layer of the tech is built on pleasing the user rather than evaluating objective reality, it means every single output, no matter how confident, has to be verified by an external ledger.
It means the era of blind trust in the machine interface is officially over. We all have to become digital gumshoes now. We have to start checking the underlying fingerprints of the systems we use.
Case file closed.
Case file closed.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep your eyes on the ledger and never trust the parrot on the stand.
This concludes the podcast. Thank you for watching. I hope you have found this podcast useful, and as always, if you have any constructive comments, I would like to read them, so drop them in the comments section below.